We've spoken about Somalia, and I suppose something was going to give the moment that President Farmajo decided that he was going to extend his term.
Yes, I mean, there'd already been calls from September for him to go and for, a transitional government to be instituted to actually run the election. And then we now see the lower house, a week ago, pass, a resolution extending his term by another 2 years. So, and the fact that most of these political parties and, different regional actors have their own paramilitary forces. Farmajo's popularity has waned significantly since 2016, when he was first elected. And so there was something that was going to give. The big positive, though, is that it's sporadic violence, but it doesn't seem as if the soldiers want to take over. They're actually trying to allow him an exit, and also more significantly, just in the past 2 hours, is the fact that the Hirshabelle and Galmudug governments, which supported him, actually said that they don't support the extension, including the prime minister. So he's now isolated, and so it's very unlikely that he will be able to survive unless he tries to use the armed forces, but I don't think they even want to support him, as we're seeing in these clashes.
All right, so my understanding is that there's actually a bit of a constitutional crisis here, because the lower house may vote, but there's still the upper house that has to concur, and that hasn't happened. So constitutionally, has he got a right to be staying on as president?
There's two things constitutionally that are the issue. One is the fact that his mandate had already expired in February. And yes, the lower house passed a resolution allowing him to stay on until the next and oversee another election, which I think was understandable in the situation. That itself was very contentious. This law is even more contentious because one is the Senate, hasn't and isn't going to support this, especially now because the Senate is made out of, most of the Senate is actually regional groupings, and all these regional groupings are against Farmajo staying on for another 2 years. So the Senate is not going to pass any resolution in support of it. And two is, for any resolution to really be implemented, it needs support from the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister has rejected this ruling. So constitutionally, his stay in power is very, very tenuous.
It must be a concern that you have security forces drawing battle lines in the capital city, shooting each other.
I mean, I think it's a big concern in the sense that it could spark, but in saying so, this is the issue with Somalia. Many of the regional actors do have their own paramilitary forces. Jubaland has its own force. Puntland has its own force. And so, it's not something that is new. And I think this is the bigger issue, is that we need to find a solution that is actually going to end this, not just a transfer of power. There needs to be a total restructuring of the Somali political system. The power needs to be moved away from the clans and the tribes towards the Somali people. We need to move away from this regionalism, the regional centered periphery tensions, and actually towards a one man, one vote system. Now, I mean, for that to be implemented, it's going to be quite a difficult process, and it's very unlikely that many of these actors with their own influences and their own militia groupings are going to want to give up power very easily, including Farmajo. But if this is not solved, it's very easy to see a situation like this occurring again.
All right, so they've missed the deadline. That's a fact. He's now constitutionally out of office. That's a fact. But what can they do? Because you can't have a vacuum of power, and you can't just put in anybody who hasn't had some kind of recognition by the people. What can Somalia do?
I mean, that is an issue. The vacuum, you can't really have a vacuum because it can very be easy, and it already is being exploited by, the SABC. So, I think a big issue is the fact that, yes, international countries have started putting pressure on Farmajo to leave, including the US, the EU, as well, as your Kenya. But I think what needs to happen is there needs to be formed, or there's a dire need for the formation of, in a sense, a transitional government to actually oversee an election. Because, I mean, you can't just have an electoral process now when there's no person at the helm. So there has to be someone, and it would be much better if it's actually a conglomeration of, Farmajo factions and some other factions from within the opposition and individuals from within the opposition. That's probably the only way out that will actually save Somalia. If Farmajo just leaves right now, there will be that power vacuum, which is very easy to be exploited, not only by SABC, but also by neighboring states such as your Kenya and regional heavyweights wanting to play a role in Somalia, such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, who all have their own ulterior motives and are supporting candidates with their own interests in mind. So there needs to be, the formation of a transitional government, I think, and there needs to be an election held as soon as possible, because, I mean, the key issue here was the fact that Farmajo was trying to, one, centralize power, but two, extend his tenure, and this is the reason, influencing, or that has actually caused these protests and these clashes.
All right, perhaps I'm being a bit flippant here, but I mean, these factions fighting in Mogadishu, is it not something like, trying to assemble deck chairs on the Titanic? You've got Al-Shabaab controlling large swathes of the country, and here you have political factions inside Mogadishu jostling for power, essentially over a small territory.
I mean, that's the truth there. It's unfortunately how, Somalia was one of the first countries on the continent to actually have a peaceful transfer in power in 1964 and 1967, long before, much of the continent, was ready to transfer power democratically and peacefully. But, I mean, the country now is being mired in violence. We have a breakaway Somaliland territory, which is running very well, running its own elections, quite democratic. Puntland wants to secede. Jubaland has, is highly, Kenya has a big presence in the Jubaland administration, and it has its own regional forces, which has clashed with Mogadishu. SABC controls much of the center and the south of the country. So, yes, it's small, in a sense, warlords fighting over territory and small swaths of territory. And that's why there needs to be a serious restructure of the political system. Because currently Somalia has this clan-based, tribe-based system. And that actually, is actually causing more division than unity, because people are voting. I mean, government places actually, provided or given out or appointed on this tribal basis. And so we need to move away from that. And I think until that restructuring doesn't occur, we're going to see this. We've already been seeing this in Jubaland, for example, in Puntland, and it's now just been extended to Mogadishu.
I'm going to pick up on something that you said a little bit earlier on, and I just want to get a clear understanding. Are we saying that the voice of the Somali people in general is actually missing in all of this, and that these leaders, these clans leaders, are carrying on deciding the fate of the country, but not really with the voice of the people behind them?
I mean, the belief was that if you get tribes involved, because the tribes are answerable to domestic constituencies, they will represent domestic constituencies better. But that was fine. We could argue that was fine in the 2012 poll, the 2016 poll. But we needed to move towards a system of one man, one vote system. Farmajo has only now recently called for one man, one vote, but actually to stay in power. So the Somali people for the past 20 odd years haven't been taken seriously, haven't been allowed in the process. When the Islamic Courts Union, for example, was formed in 2006, the Ethiopians came in and forced the Islamic Courts Union out, that actually led to the resurgence or the strengthening of the Shabaab. So yes, Somalis themselves don't have much say, and that's why we're actually seeing a situation where Farmajo doesn't want to give up his influence and his power. So too is the regions. In Jubaland, in Puntland, and so it's jostling for power rather than actually representing the will of the Somali people, and that's actually leading to a situation where Somalis are now, having to take these tribal identities and these tribal loyalties, and actually that may lead to the breaking up of Somalia if something is not done about this, and the fact that there still remains these center periphery tensions, which aren't being solved.
In the meantime, has Shabaab stepped up, or are they just carrying on and ignoring what's happening in Mogadishu politics? They just do what they do and carry on as they have been before.
I think this, the Shabaab, for example, killed 13 security officials in February, which were attending a conference to try and mediate, the current political tension. But these tensions only benefit Shabaab. Shabaab is one of the few groups in Somalia that actually is able to move above the tribal, allegiances and tribal loyalties and clan-based identities. And so these benefit Shabaab. It shows, populations that look, democracy is not working, government is not working, so we should rather than, support Shabaab. But also, in a sense, Shabaab is benefiting from the fact that the US has now suspended drone strikes, the fact that, MSM is pulling out much of his troops. And so, the only way to actually confront the Shabaab would be a strong, unified government that is supported by Somalis. And, the current situation actually leaves, Shabaab is probably licking its lips at the current scenario.